Language is incredibly ingrained in the human condition. Since man appeared on Earth, there's been a need for language for communication between each other. Civilization would be impossible without language. It is essential to the human processes and to observing and making change in the world around us. But language may be even more important and have a bigger effect on shaping each individual as a person and that individual's perceptions than many of us realize. When asked the question, does learning a new language mean learning a new way of thinking? Psychologists didn't know for a long time. Scholars would simply speculate. Those who said no, of course not, said there was no way language could affect our thinking so drastically. Those who said yes said there was no way language could not affect our way of thinking. Proponents of the no, it doesn't affect development team would often point to a psychological and linguistical principle called universal grammar. Developed by Noah Chomsky, it says that linguistic ability manifests itself without being taught and that there are properties all natural human languages share. Some conclusive studies surrounding this topic were finally completed in 2008 to 2009 with interesting results. One such study was conducted by Professor Boroditsky of Stanford University in an Aborigine settlement on the northeastern tip of Australia in Queensland. These people are called the Cook Taor. In their language, they use the cardinal directions to describe positions in space. So instead of saying the shop is down the street, they would say the shop is south or the shop is southeast, depending on the direction that they are facing currently. They are immensely better English speakers than English speakers at being oriented because their language forces them to do this. To test this idea, Professor Boroditsky gave people sets of pictures that showed some kind of temporal progression, like pictures of a man aging or a banana being eaten. English speakers would arrange the pictures from left to right in order of the time sequence that they appeared. Hebrew speakers would arrange them from right to left, which proves that writing does have an impact in language. The Cook Taor did not arrange the cards more often from left to right or right to left, nor more towards or away from them. They arranged it from east to west. That is, when they were seated facing south, the cards went left to right. When they faced north, the cards went from right to left. When they faced east, the cards came toward the body, and so on, spontaneously used the spatial orientation to construct the representations of time. They were never told what direction they were facing. They just instinctively knew because their language has forced them to adapt like this. In another study, English speakers were taught to use size metaphors, as in Greek, to describe duration. For example, to say, a movie is larger than a sneeze, or vertical metaphors, as in Mandarin, to describe event order. Once the English speakers, Greek speakers, or Mandarin speakers had learned the new way of the language they were being taught, their cognitive development in tasks and tests would exactly resemble those of the language speakers before. It didn't matter what their original language was or what their learned language was. Whatever language they spoke, that would determine their cognitive performance. Another test tested whether differences in color language lead to differences in color perception. For example, in Russian, there is no single word that covers all the colors that English speakers call blue. Russian makes an obligatory distinction between light blue and dark blue, and they have different words for both. So Professor Boroditsky wondered, does this distinction mean that light blue blues look more different from dark blue blues to Russian speakers? The data says yes. Russian speakers are quicker to distinguish two shades of blue that are called by their different names in Russian than if the two fall into the same category. For English speakers, all these shades are still designated by the same word, blue, and there are no comparable differences in reaction time. Furthermore, the Russian advantage disappears when subjects are asked to perform a verbal interference task while making color judgments, proving that their language is what's shaping their perception of the color. Just as a last example, in some languages like German or Spanish, the speaker describes things depending on gender. In many tests, this has been proven to influence how they thought of these objects. For example, German and Spanish speakers were asked to describe a key. In Spanish, the word for key is feminine, and in German, it is masculine. Spanish speakers would almost always use words such as shiny, beautiful, intricate, more feminine words, regardless of their background. German speakers would use words like heavy, jagged, useful. This perception due to language carries over into other fields, such as art. Often when an artist personifies an abstract idea, such as death or time or love, their personification 85% of the time is based solely on the gender that that word has in their native language. So if language truly does shape our cognitive development and the very way our brain is hardwired, can you imagine how easy it might be to manipulate language or misinterpret it because of the differences between people due solely to language and how this might lead to conflict? It's so easy, in fact, that an entire set of vocabulary has been developed to label different kinds of language discrimination and language that can arise in a conflict. The first of these terms is linguistic alienation. Linguistic alienation is defined as the situation in which individuals cannot understand a discourse in their own language because of the use of highly technical vocabularies. Linguistic violence is the second term, and it is defined as the situation in which individuals are hurt or harmed by words. There are two more terms. There's negative peace, which was mentioned in Fadi's presentation, the temporary absence of active war or the lull between wars. And there's positive peace, which is the negation of war and the presence of justice. To me, the difference between negative peace and positive peace is sort of representative of the difference between conflict transformation and conflict resolution. I don't think anybody would disagree with me when I say that positive peace is the kind of peace we should all be trying to create and manifest into. And the way to do that can be greatly impacted by the language that we're using, how we're speaking to other people, and making sure that all parties are being included. I'd also like to introduce one more term, which is warist discourse. And warist discourse is language which takes for granted that wars are inevitable, justifiable, and winnable. And here to talk more about that is former Army photojournalist Ben Fox. Please welcome him.
Thank you, Michaela. Hi, my name is Ben Fox. I am a former Army photojournalist, public affairs specialist, media relations specialist, videographer, and occasional broadcast journalist. I'm going to talk to you about warist discourse, and I think I'm a pretty good subject matter expert on it because it's what I did in the military for 6 years. And to start off, recently, my old brigade commander for my first deployment was in town to speak at another conference. And he told me, or he told the crowd what war is. He said, war is, and he didn't say the usual. He didn't say war is necessary, because that's a typical response normally when someone's going to justify going to war. He didn't say war is the hard choice, which is another very typical response. He said something that spoke to me because it related so much to our deployment together. He said, war is vile. And he was right. War is vile. And he went on to say, and I'm paraphrasing, that war is the most vile thing you can imagine, with the exception of the reason to actually go to war. And in that context, he was right. Our deployment happened 3 years after the invasion of Iraq. Al-Qaeda had moved in. People were being tortured. Limbs were being severed in rooms and piled there. We had mass graves. Horrible, horrible things were happening. And in that case, we were doing the right thing by doing the vile thing. We were going to war. Now this presentation I'm about to give, I don't mean to cause any kind of controversy. I'm not for or against this idea. I'm just trying to educate about the idea of warist discourse as our military uses it. Now, this isn't a new idea. In fact, language inside the military kind of dictates this. When we hear about a firefight, we often hear that someone is engaging the enemy. Well, they're not marrying the enemy. They're trying to kill the enemy. But engage is a very sterile, scientific way of putting it. It doesn't have that oomph. It doesn't have the impact of we're trying to kill somebody. And we don't just see this within the military doctrine. We also see this when we name combat operations. For example, Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan, Operation Iraqi Freedom. These evoke a sense of this is necessary, what we need to do. We're freeing people. Now, whether you agree with that or not, the language here is important. And it's not really portraying exactly what's going on. This idea that people are dying, people are killing, is very important in our discourse about about war. So this isn't a new idea either. In the 90s, Bill Clinton's Operation Restore Hope in Somalia, which is better known by the singular incident of the Black Hawk Down incident. That's a little bit more descriptive of what is actually happening. There's a terrible incident where 2 Black Hawks went down in the middle of Mogadishu. Restore Hope, I don't know if that really portrays exactly what happened to me. Another one, Senior President Bush and his war in Panama. There's conflict, as most people would like to say. There's conflict in Panama, Operation Just Cause. Or as my wife likes to say, just 'cause. Why not? And I think a lot of soldiers in the military are very aware of this idea of the way we name our combat operations and how euphemistic they can really be. In fact, when I was in Iraq, I stumbled across a couple of operations, and that kind of amused me. And the first one is Operation Prancing Unicorn. I think some soldiers got tired of the typical naming conventions of their operations. They want to have a little bit of fun. But then my favorite one was Operation Woodshed. And I asked the battalion commander who was in charge of it, I said, why woodshed? What is that supposed to mean? He said, because we're going to take him out back to the woodshed and beat him senseless. It's like that. There's no euphemism there, is there? That's pretty straightforward as to what we're talking about. Now, to get a little bit more personal, as a photojournalist and as a videographer, a lot of my time was spent covering soldiers' memorials. In fact, there was a time when my sergeant didn't want to send me out so much because she was worried, not that I might be hurt, although she was worried about that, but more importantly, no one would be there to cover memorials that would happen if I was out on a mission. We had soldiers dying at a certain time at least twice a week, and if I was out on a mission, I might miss those memorials. So I had to take a lot of photos like this. I had to get in the face of grown men crying, and I felt like a jerk. I'm right here in his face with the camera lens, and he's visibly upset. And over again, this happened constantly. We lost 110 soldiers for over 50 memorials. So many of them were for most of them were for more than one soldier dying at the same time. And these affected me a lot. These affected me so much that the euphemisms that we'd use had trouble registering in my brain. You see, because when we see photos like this, whenever we use these photos, we'd put captions beneath them, and we'd often reference they're honoring a fallen soldier. Well, a fallen soldier, to me, that's kind of a euphemism. It did, in my mind, describe exactly what it meant at that moment. Because fallen it gives you the idea that they fell down. They can get back up. Because in my mind, the reality, they were dead. We didn't use that word because there's a sense of finality. Nobody likes the idea of a dead soldier. I don't like the idea of a dead soldier. I was a soldier. It's a horrible thing. Now, in one of these photos, I don't know if it was this one, it could have been any of them, I actually put the word dead soldier instead of fallen soldier. And my sergeant was smart enough, she knew, she said, there's something wrong with Private First Class Fox there. He's not using the euphemism. And she was right, because in my mind, I couldn't correlate the two. I was having trouble using the euphemism in everyday life and thinking something else, thinking something dreadful, thinking something terrible. And the whole point of all of this is simply that language matters. Language matters in the way you use it to describe something, and it matters especially in the way it's used to be thrown at you. And we need to be cognizant of this idea of when an organization is trying to convince you of something, if they want to sell you something, if they're trying to get you to do something, we need to know that language matters, especially when it comes to something as vile as war. Thank you.